How's it going, everybody? So we have a fun review today as we're talking Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare. 2025 is in full swing now, our first official horror movie of the year. And to some of you, this might be a surprise this is my first horror movie of the year because we do have a much bigger, more popular horror movie on the horizon. In case you weren't aware, Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare is the latest installment in the twisted childhood universe. The horror spins on these iconic children's characters that are now in the public domain. You probably know the two more famous films in this franchise so far, and that is Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, and its sequel, both of which are movies that I was fairly mixed upon. That first Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, I did not like whatsoever, ended up being on my worst of the year list that year. However, the sequel, Blood and Honey 2, I actually thought was a vast improvement, so I was hoping with this new installment, the first in this universe that doesn't involve Winnie the Pooh, because of the fact so many of these same creatives involved in those were involved in this as well, I was hoping that it was going to continue to improve, or, you know, it could just crash and burn. I mean, I was ready for either outcome. In many ways, it is kind of respectable that these same people are involved in all of these different films. Rhys Wakewaterfield, the director of Blood and Honey and its sequel, ended up writing this film with Scott Chambers, who also is the director of this. And on top of that, Scott Chambers is the actor who portrayed Christopher Robin in the last Blood and Honey sequel. I gotta say, with him shifting here behind the camera, I actually was pretty surprised. His approach here to immersing you within the world manages to capture some genuinely creepy sequences. The overall world building here in Neverland Nightmares, while it isn't anything groundbreaking by any means, setup-wise it suffices to set up a journey of twisted surprises. For the most part here, I do think the cast overall is fairly solid. This interpretation of Wendy certainly took some getting used to. Most of the time, you know, Wendy, she's depicted as this lover of magic and whimsy, but this older version of the character has far more grit to her, and a bit of an edge in seeking vengeance. Her frantic race having to venture out to rescue her brother Michael from Peter's grasp certainly is a wild ride, to say the least. By the end of this adventure, it gets pretty gnarly as far as the blood and gore of it all. Speaking more on Peter Pan himself, I would say that Peter Pan probably was one of the things that worked the best for me overall in the film. Martin Portlock is asked to convey a plethora of twisted emotions here with his performance. Effectively, he balances that terror with childlike wonder, mixing it together so seamlessly in how he conveys the character depending on what the scene calls for. More often than not, Peter Pan in this is played very seriously, which unfortunately I was kind of disappointed by. Besides that, I also just found the character to be inherently quite gross. The design, the tattered clothes he wears, and his creepy mask only makes it all the more unnerving. Based on his appearance here, it does seem like we are setting him up for bigger, far grander things within this universe that they've been setting up. And I think after this appearance in this movie, I think it does show a lot of potential where you could go with this character. Admittedly though, I gotta say, I wasn't overly fond of the depiction here of Tinkerbell. The performance was fine enough. I don't really have much bad to say about the performance by and large. Throughout the film, we're giving glances into Peter Pan's backstory and the relationship that he had with Tinkerbell, and even for this universe, it just feels a bit icky to have this portrayal of Tinkerbell be a heroin addict who potentially at one point in time in the past was one of Peter's victims. Obviously, mileage will vary on how you feel about that depiction, I suppose, but I just was not a big fan of that in particular. With these movies, you do have to go in accepting that these are low-budget efforts. Even still, I think they do try their best here with the budget they do have to create genuine scares and brutal kills, several of which are pretty nasty and memorable. It's definitely nowhere near as brutal or has as many kills as the Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey films are concerned. So if you were going into this expecting the same level of carnage as those Blood and Honey films, I would probably temper your expectations a little bit here. Something that we've seen this franchise to this point struggle with is kind of riding that line, balancing how they try to pay homage to classic horror films. When I say ride the line, I mean riding that line between paying homage or just kind of, you know, ripping them off in a sense. For example, in Blood and Honey 2, several of the different characters filled out a different slasher icon archetype. Here with Peter Pan, that very much is the same case. If I had to pick which icon of horror I feel like they're most trying to emulate here with Peter Pan, I would say it's probably Pennywise. Not only through the backstory established for Peter Pan, considering he kidnapped children decades prior and never was found, but more so, it comes from the very opening of this movie, where Peter Pan talks to a young kid through a cellar door. Very clearly, they're trying to emulate the sequence from It, where Pennywise is talking to Georgie through the sewer. I mean, sure, it's a tense scene that opens up the movie pretty well, but it essentially is basically the exact same sequence. I did actually like the ideas presented in the film around Neverland in general, and whether or not it actually is a real thing or not. Since how the story plays out in this, there is that level of belief it could go either way. Tonally, though, is where I feel like Neverland Nightmare started to lose me a bit. For me, it struggles a lot because it does take itself a bit too seriously given the material, the subject matter that we're dealing with here. It's kind of a similar problem that very first Blood and Honey had for me, where everything was taken so uber seriously, but then the sequel tried to have a little bit more fun with the idea. We're kind of back to square one. At different times, Neverland Nightmares tries to have fun, which was when I liked the movie the most. It's just tough because it is trying to play things so straight and serious, even down to the color palette of the movie. You know, when you think Peter Pan, you think the fantastical, colorful. Part of me understands your approach because you're trying to make most of the environments feel nasty, gross. Yet from a visual standpoint, as an audience member, I just found it visually very unappealing at times, although I think for the most part, the movie is well shot. Overall, I do feel like the film does have some potential to it. It certainly has a fair amount of pros and cons, similar to the Blood and Honey films. If you enjoy those, I could see you also enjoying this as well. I don't think it's going to end up making my worst of the year list or my best of the year list by the end of 2025. It's okay enough mostly on the back of Peter Pan alone, but you might get some enjoyment out of it in that way. Currently, if you ask me where I would rank it amongst the other two films in this franchise to this point, which is crazy that we're even calling it a franchise, a universe, I definitely feel like Blood and Honey 2 is number 1, and then I'd probably put Neverland Nightmare, which would mean I would have the original Blood and Honey in my last place spot. But once you get a chance to check out Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare, make sure you share your thoughts down below. Did you like the movie? Did you not like the movie? Thank you guys, as always, for checking out videos. I always do appreciate it. If you like on the video, also subscribe to the channel to update reviews, reactions, unboxings, and more. But next time, I'll see you guys later.